They pushed her barefoot into the snow, her skin turning blue, her breath fading into silence, while the townsfolk watched, whispering that she would never survive the night. They said she was cursed, a danger, a woman who dared to question power. That winter, they believed they had buried both her voice and her name. But history remembers what fear tries to erase. Because when she returned, she did not ask for justice. She demanded it. And even the Duke, who had ordered her exile, refused to speak her name aloud ever again. Some said he heard her footsteps in his halls long before she arrived. Others claimed the snow itself carried her back. One thing, however, is certain. The night she returned, power shifted, and every man who mocked her learned why silence can be the most dangerous weapon of all. Before we uncover what was buried beneath that snow, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you never miss the forgotten truths history tried to erase. Her name was Mara Valestria, daughter of a lesser noble, educated, observant, and unusually quiet in a court that thrived on gossip. She believed silence was not weakness, but strategy, and for years it protected her. She watched the powerful argue, make alliances, and betray one another. And she remembered everything. That was her first mistake. At 17, Mara was chosen to become lady-in-waiting to the Duchess Elsbeth, a woman both adored and feared. The Duchess trusted Mara, not for her loyalty, but because Mara listened without speaking. At court, this was a rare commodity, but whispers move faster than footsteps in royal halls, and silence becomes threatening when others cannot hear what you truly think. It began with a conversation Mara never intended to overhear. Late one evening, walking past the council chamber, she heard the Duke's voice through the door, sharp, anxious, fueled by fear. He was hiding something, a plan to raise new taxes on the poor, to seize land from those who could not pay, and silence anyone who spoke against him. That night, Mara realized she was standing in the heart of a storm she never meant to enter. She wanted to warn the Duchess, perhaps even convince her to intervene. But the Duchess did not care for justice. She cared for position, for power, and power has no room for conscience. Mara felt the weight of her realization. In this court, morality was not a shield. It was a target. Still, she tried. Carefully, she phrased her concerns, softening every word. She expected caution. Instead, she saw something she had never seen in Elspeth's eyes. Fear. Mara, she said quietly, do not speak of this again. Some things, child, are buried for a reason. But it was already too late, because someone else had listened. Someone who understood silence far better than Mara did. Within days, rumors began that Mara was plotting against the Duke, that she had secret meetings with priests, that she believed the duchy belonged to another family by right. One morning, her chamber door was opened not by servants, but by armed guards. She did not plead, she did not cry. She only asked one question: by whose order? The guard hesitated, then spoke a name she had never expected: Elsbeth. They marched her outside without shoes, as dusk surrendered to winter. Her family name vanished from court records within hours, and while townspeople watched her pushed into the snow, many believed they had witnessed justice. Only a few wondered why a young woman, barely 20, walked with her head high during her exile, like someone counting steps, memorizing faces. That night, frost bit at her skin. She found shelter inside a collapsed barn, nearly a mile away. She thought she might die there, but another thought kept her awake. As the snow fell through the cracks above her, she whispered, "They fear what I know, so knowledge shall be my weapon." Weeks passed. Rumors spread that she had died. No one searched for her, not even her own family. They were stripped of their standing and forbidden from speaking her name. She became a ghost in records, a rumor in taverns, a cautionary tale used by mothers to warn their daughters about disobedience. But exile is not always punishment. Sometimes it becomes transformation. Mara crossed borders, traveling through villages under assumed names. She spoke to farmers who had lost their land, merchants who paid taxes twice in 1 month, widows whose husbands were imprisoned for debts they never owed. She listened, and this time her silence was not fear, but calculation. She kept a journal of names, dates, amounts taken, men who enforced the laws, and men who profited from them. She discovered a pattern so clear it felt deliberate. This was not greed, it was strategy, and behind it stood one architect, the Duke himself. Years passed. The Duchess fell ill. The Duke tightened his control, and the people, hungry, desperate, angry, began to ask questions. They searched for someone who could answer them, someone who knew the truth. And one winter evening, when the wind howled against the walls of the castle, and the Duke walked the halls alone, a servant handed him a sealed letter. It contained only one sentence, written in ink the color of dried blood. "Did you think snow could silence me?" The Duke read it twice. His hands trembled, not because of the words, but because it was signed Mara Valestria, and attached to the letter was a list of every secret he thought was buried forever. The Duke slowly looked toward the window and saw a lone figure walking through the snow toward the castle gates. The silence had returned. Mara did not return with an army. She returned with documents, ledgers, names, dates, and signatures, paper, not steel, testimonies, not swords. She had learned that truth could overthrow power faster than bloodshed, because a revolt can be crushed, but records cannot. She rented a small room at the edge of town and began sending letters, first to merchants, then to minor nobles, then to those priests who had once been silenced. Every copy of her evidence was signed with a simple phrase, "If I vanish again, this truth will not." Soon her name was spoken quietly in taverns, low in church pews, whispered between guards at change of post. She became a question rather than a person. If a young woman could uncover this alone, what else had been hidden? The Duke summoned an emergency council. He entered expecting obedience. Instead, he saw what he had never seen before: hesitation. Some refused to meet his eyes, some clenched their jaws, and some had already spoken to her. He dismissed the council at once. Panic began to fracture his composure. He ordered the guards to search for Mara's location, but the guards had new orders from others, and those orders were simpler: do nothing. They were tired of collecting taxes from starving families. They were tired of watching widows cry. Some of them, he realized with dread, had wives and daughters of their own. That night, Mara entered the town's abandoned granary, now a gathering place for those the Duke had wronged. They were not soldiers, but bakers, farmers, mothers, elders. One old man, his voice trembling, asked, "Do you want revenge?" Mara paused and shook her head. "I want a reckoning." Her plan was not violent. It was surgical. Every document she had collected was duplicated in multiple copies. Some were already hidden in neighboring provinces. Some were in the hands of minor nobles desperate for change. And one was already in the possession of the Duchess, Elspeth. After her illness, the Duchess had lost influence, condemned to the shadows of her own castle. But sickness has a way of revealing truth. Her power had been built on the Duke's ambition, but her loyalty, once hollow, had begun to turn to guilt. The final message Mara sent her was cold and simple. "You feared I would speak. I fear you no longer can." 2 days later, the Duchess requested a private audience with her husband. No one knows what was said behind those doors. But when she left, her hands shook uncontrollably. She sent word for Mara. The meeting took place in the chapel at dawn. No guards, no witnesses, only 2 women, one who once exiled the other, and one who returned stronger. For a moment, neither spoke. Then the Duchess whispered, "You survived." Mara replied, "You didn't." The Duchess closed her eyes. "What will you do with all this?" Mara answered with the calm of a judge delivering sentence, "I will give the people what was taken from them, land, law, and the right to be heard." The Duchess nodded. She did not ask for forgiveness. She asked for one thing only. "Do not let my son grow to become like his father." Mara left the chapel with a single truth burning inside her. The court was already shifting. Victory, however, would come only with calculation. So she made her final move. At the next council session, Mara walked through the castle gates, not as a criminal, not as a ghost, but as a witness. Dozens of townspeople followed behind her. Faces once ignored were now impossible to overlook. And in front of everyone, she laid her documents on the council table. The Duke slammed his fist and shouted that forged papers meant nothing. But this time, no one stood to defend him. Instead, Lord Nevrin, the man who had once been his closest ally, spoke softly. "Your Grace, the people now know that alone cannot be undone." Silence followed, a silence that felt heavier than any verdict. The Duke looked around and saw no loyal eyes, only cautious ones, calculating ones, some looking at Mara, some looking at an empty future where his name was only spoken with shame. That evening he fled the duchy, without a crown, without farewells, without dignity. Mara never chased him. Instead, she stood before the townspeople and said the words that defined her legacy. "I do not return to rule. I return to rebuild." But history always leaves one question unanswered. When the Duke abandoned his castle, when he packed his belongings in fear and set off before dawn, only one thing was missing from his chamber. The letter she first sent him, the one that made his hands tremble. It was gone, and no one knows who took it. Some say the Duchess kept it. Some say Mara burned it. Others say he carries it still, as a reminder that silence, once broken, can echo for a lifetime. Justice does not always rise with swords. It can rise with truth, with courage, and with the refusal to stay silent when silence becomes oppression. If stories like these move you, make sure to subscribe to our channel so history's forgotten voices are never exiled again.